The Fall of the House of Usher. Let's talk. Spoiler-free. This is an intervention from Mike Flanagan. The show follows Roderick Usher, the CEO of a massive pharmaceutical company, his ambitious sister Madeline, and his 6 adult children. It's revealed as the show begins that all 6 children die mysteriously over the span of a few days. In the wake of these deaths, Roderick sits in his dilapidated childhood home with U.S. Attorney and longtime foe Auguste Dupin, with the promise of explaining how he's responsible for the deaths of all of his children. I went into the show expecting it to be an adaptation of an Edgar Allan Poe short story, but in fact it's more of an original story with interpolations of several Poe stories and poems. Well, the interpolations are loose until some characters are quoting poetry verbatim, which I found kind of hard to stomach. But I did think it was clever to use Roderick's conversation with Dupin as like a framing device. I think without that anchor, the flashback scenes to Roderick's younger years and the final days of his children would feel unfocused. And those scenes established some eerie recurrences that carry throughout the show. Why is Roderick's granddaughter sending him texts that he's ignoring? What are the noises coming from the basement? Overall, I think the structure of the show is interesting, even if some of the flashback scenes are a little bit of a drag, and it doesn't really hit its stride until episode 4. It was still an inventive way to tell the story, which I appreciated. As far as Mike Flanagan goes, I'm pretty lukewarm about his work. Is that an unpopular opinion? He consistently finds ways to shock me with his narrative twists, horrifying imagery, jumpy edits. In terms of Usher, the scenes involving Roderick's mother and Victorine in particular were really chilling to me. As far as I'm concerned, Midnight Mass remains the best thing he's ever made. But what I find least appealing about his style is probably what makes him one of the most popular horror filmmakers right now. Mike Flanagan hates ambiguity. Flanagan loves to expose his hand explicitly to the audience before the end of his work, which I think endears him to mass audiences because it makes for a satisfying watch. But at the end of the day, horror is most effective to me when I don't understand everything I've seen immediately. A film or a show genuinely haunts me when I find myself trying to interpret what I just watched after, or my imagination running wild, envisioning imagery that was only shown briefly or not at all. And with Flanagan's work, that rarely happens for me because it's all laid bare, which is valid and fine, and I understand why that's appealing to both him and his audience. But at times it feels like he's doing this so that I pat him on the back for how clever he is. So in that sense, it's strange to me to have a story that essentially begins at the end, all the children are dead. It's affirming this idea that the conclusion isn't the point of the story. We're invested to see how we get there. And yet the final episode plays out as this massive snapping into place when I feel like some of the elements would have been better if they were left up to audience interpretation. And honestly, I read the representation of queerness in the show, which was ample, as a way to signal their hedonism and greed and need to compensate for a void. It's like all of the kids are sexually fluid because they have unlimited access to everyone at all times and take advantage of that, which I don't think is necessarily positive queer representation. I don't think how queer the show was necessarily a good thing, but please let me know if you see things differently. Ultimately, I agree with the morals of the story. The profit motive in the pharmaceutical industry drives unethical behavior. True wealth comes from meaningful human connection, which Roderick trades in for money and power. But to be honest, it felt kind of insulting as a viewer to have those morals spelled out for me through dialogue when the story already does it. Several characters preach in a way that feels on the nose and hard to watch. Despite my complaining, I don't think The Fall of the House of Usher is a bad show by any means. There are genuinely scary moments, and it interpolates Edgar Allan Poe's imagery and stories in clever ways. But to me, the best parts of the show are of Roderick and Dupin sitting in that room talking. I think the most tension and interesting characterization arose during those parts of the show. And although I understand the impulse to communicate exactly what you were intending with your story, Mike, my dude, you need to trust the audience a little more.